Welcome back to another episode of the Daily Flip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be talking about your favorite thing on the highways. I promise you, if you drive, you know you love your tractor trailers. Well, we're talking about a new rule that actually makes getting a CDL a little bit easier and how it's had bad ripple effects across the entire United States. There's a few different elements to it, so we'll give you the context, we'll break it down for you. But before we get there, we got to do our daily debate. So, is a CDL supposed to be a higher barrier of entry than a normal driver's license in your mind? Should we make it easier? Should we deregulate it to make it so that more people can get CDLs, so more people can transport our goods and help our economy flow? This is a serious question, not a sarcastic one, because I could see a true libertarian or small government argument that would say it would actually be beneficial to have less regulations in place about our drivers. So with that, throw down your opinion down in the comment section. Let's actually get into this article that comes from the Daily Caller. The headline reads, "Record trucking-related carnage is no accident." And this article focuses on a few different aspects of it. It talks about how CDL licenses are actually being acquired by people that are not residents or even citizens or can prove that they're living in a permanent place here in the United States, but also that they are having a terrible effect across the industry. And what's even more interesting is that they point out here, the author does, that the requirements for getting a CDL have become less stringent. And then this is also having a knock-on effect for the rest of the economy. Now, my issue itself isn't so much with the immigration, but the fact that the barriers were lowered and it allowed more immigrants to come in is a side effect that is not necessarily at issue to me, but rather the fact that the standards were lowered at all. Now, I don't love big government regulation. I don't think that you should have to go through all the courses that you have to. I think you should have to pass a driving test in order to get a license. But a lot of the extra certification, I don't necessarily think that it is great and necessary. I think the test itself should be enough to dissuade people and ensure that, and maybe even have higher barriers, have a more inclusive and extensive test, much like the British do, though of course they have other courses that go along with it before you have to take that test. But my point being is the over-regulation, the amount of hours that you have to spend on some of these classes, it's interesting to say the least, and I don't think it is as productive. And especially when schools already offer them as a part of public schooling, you can still offer that as a class, and not because it's required by the state in order to get your license, but rather because you want people to actually be able to get their license. You want them to be able to get better at driving, and you have these training opportunities. So with that, my general overview shown, let's get more into the article itself. Quote, "Just 5 years ago, new truckers had to produce a birth certificate and speak English and confirm state residency to even qualify for a CDL. If the driver couldn't speak English, he couldn't get a driver's test. Today, any evidence of a work permit or foreign visa is enough to qualify for a non-domicile CDL." And so think about that. You do not have to even speak the language, which I don't know if that's as necessary as the author would love to make it sound, or at least imply. And I say imply because he's making it sound as though speaking English is a crucial part to driving. And you can make an argument that's important to know while driving in America, though, is not essential to complete your job. But here's the more interesting parts after that quote. Quote, "In 2022, the Department of Transportation's Federal Motor Carrier Administration set high federal standards for training requirements through the entry-level driver training rules. The goal was to make the highways safer in conjunction with state commercial drivers training laws that have been in place for decades. But these new rules have more exemptions in the federal tax code. Employers, municipalities, and online video providers posing as educators now provide commercial driving training through unchecked self-certification." So let's pause there. For any of you who didn't go to public school, or any of you who didn't have the resources to go to one of these classes that your school provided, do you remember taking that online course in order to understand the rules of the road, understand the regulations in place, because I do. Now, of course, in my case, in most people's cases, actually, it should be everybody's case, that has to be supplemented with paying a driving service to get you time on the road with an instructor. And most of the time, this is not to make sure that you're actually a great driver, because you should have been doing that with your parents, but to ensure that you have what it takes to be able to pass the exam. And this is interesting in my mind that these CDL certifications are coming from non-physical instructors. Now, of course, I do believe the article is leaving out that there are some supplemental things that come along with this, and you definitely still have to take a test in order to get the CDL. But the point being, if we keep lowering these barriers, if we keep making it easier to get onto the road, of course you're going to see stats like this next one that come out. Quote, the results have been catastrophic according to the National Highway Safety Administration. 153,472 highway truck accidents resulted in 5,472 highway fatalities in 2023, a 40% increase from 2014. The 2024 data shows similar fatality rates. The odds of getting killed by a truck driver is from 20 times greater than flying on a U.S. airplane. And this is not something that is extremely shocking and unfamiliar, because as I mentioned at the very beginning, if you've driven on these roads, you love tractor trailers. You know exactly what I'm talking about when I say, oh, we all love tractor trailers, because they are the most dangerous thing on the road. There's no doubt about it. But this is something you can't stand for. Not only can we not stand for it, on a human life perspective, we don't want to put more of these people at risk simply for saying that we have extremely low barriers to entry. Though, once again, I think that you can very well argue that these different certifications are actually too regulated, but making the test itself harder is the way to go here, not simply saying, oh, we're going to make it harder to go through these certification processes. Make the test even more extensive, especially for the amount of time that you spend on the road. What I would say is you actually base how the test should be structured and how hard it should be based on the average amount of time that the average person in that car type will be on the road. So for most people, it's probably going to be 20 hours a week, maybe a little bit more, maybe somewhere around 30 hours a week. I think that's a lot personally, but we're assuming that you do a lot of extra driving on the weekends and maybe an hour or two each day in order to get into work. Now, of course, that is a little bit different for a whole bunch of people, but the average across the United States is probably that for most cars. And for truck drivers, that number is definitely not accurate. We're talking about 7, 8, 9, 10-hour shifts a day. That's at least 50 hours, if not more, if they're doing long hauls and long stretches before they take their few days off when they're back home. So my point being, you can actually have a expression that says, okay, if there's this many hours on the road for any given person, this is how hard we need to make the test. This is how high of a percentage you need to get. And obviously a driving test is much different than, or I say a driving test, a normal car driving test is much different than a CDL already, because there are so many more pieces of knowledge you have to know and hyper specific kinds, but make sure that it's even harder for those and go through more techniques in that test. Because guess what? If the online certifications that these people are paying for are not up to snuff, then we can find out that way. It's all about limiting the amount of government regulation. Preferably, I don't even think you need a license, but that's an ideal world. That's unrealistic, and especially when we're dealing with massive trucks that have this potential, it's something that will not go over well. Simply to say you don't need to have a federal or state issued license. But point being, this is a conversation that needs to be had. And the fact that this article uses the framework of people who are not from this country getting these licenses is an interesting one, but it's not as important as the underlying truth here, which is we are allowing for lower standards to drive on our highways, which puts our citizens at risk. And it puts other people even other immigrants, if you want to frame it that way, at risk. It puts anybody that participates in these roads at risk. And we cannot have this, not only for, like I said, the human life aspect, but also for the economic reason. If people are afraid to go on the roads, that's going to slow them down. If trucks are afraid to go on the road, it's going to slow the movement of goods down. If there are extra regulations that come into heavy-handedly after this, that will also slow down the economy, because guess what? It will limit probably the amount of truckers that can go out there. So all these things are important considerations, and I want to know your opinion. Throw it down there in the comment section. We already did our daily debate, but this is so interesting to me after listening to this. What do you think? Put it down there. Love to hear it. So with that said, if you want to check out today's article, it will be linked in the description below that like and subscribe button. Also down there, you can find the podcast on Spotify, Pocket Cast, Podvine, as well as the Twitter handle at your DailyFlip, where I post links to these episodes every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, as well as 6 and 6 on Tuesday and Thursday. I leave room to be wrong. This last one, if you were here, I actually put out a 6 and 6 earlier today. And that's because there was a whole friend's birthday going on, so on and so forth. So we were a little bit off on the schedule to get it out, but we got it out, and we intend to always get you those 5 pieces of content every single week. So with that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe. Don't die.